Hey, what's up, everybody? This is an open discussion with C3 Films. My name is Chris, and this is.
Cheryl.
And today we're going to be talking about the movie Rebecca, the 1940 Hitchcock film. It's an old movie. I hadn't seen it before. Cheryl recommended it. So we are going to go into spoilers territory. If you haven't seen it, it's on YouTube for free. Go and give it a watch. It's 2 hours, but it's worth it overall. It's worth it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into this. I actually kind of don't know where to start with this movie. Like, it starts off, I guess, kind of like the classic feeling of those movies in the time, like almost like a Disney movie. And so it kind of set my expectations to the point where I was kind of surprised when I saw that this is an Alfred Hitchcock film based on how the tone of the movie began.
When you went into it, what were you expecting?
When I went into it, I think since you told me it was his first film, from the pictures that I saw,
It's
or
not his
no,
first film.
not his first film, but it was
it's
one
an
of his early
yeah, it's an
films.
early one.
So I guess I was thinking that, especially after I saw the pictures when I was trying to like make thumbnails, like I would see like the pictures from the movie. I was thinking that it wasn't going to be like his other movies. I was thinking it wasn't going to be like a horror film. Like there are people who start off making one type of movie and then they end up being kind of veering towards another movie. So I thought it was going to be a love story that he then that he starts. So he started off maybe making like love story movies and then veered into making like horror movies. That was my expectation going in.
Right. So it's actually a common misconception that that Hitchcock is a horror movie guy. He's not. He's actually titled Master of Suspense, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a little different from horror. I think the reason why people are thinking horror when they think of him is because he's most famous for Psycho, which is like one of his only horror films that he ever made. So,
Right. Well, it's interesting because I guess when I think about him, I think about Psycho and I think about The Birds, which I know that's a horror movie, right? I haven't seen
hmm
it, but I
yeah,
feel like I remember that being a horror movie. And
yeah,
I think those are like the two movies that I normally associate with Hitchcock. And even though I've seen Rear Window and now I've seen Vertigo, and Rear Window is less of a horror movie, but more like a thriller. So I guess that's how I kind of saw him as like a a horror thriller type director. So if it's not necessarily going to lean into horror, it's going to lean into like the thriller. But no matter what, there's going to be something tense. I think
yes,
that's how I kind of see him. Um,
suspense.
yeah, exactly. But when it came to Rebecca, with the way that the movie was framed and the way it started and everything, I didn't have that same expectation. Also because of the fact that I saw pictures and the pictures didn't look like anything that was going to be rough or anything else like that, you know?
Yeah. I think that's also one of the reasons why I liked it is because it was kind of romantic. It kind of was a romance movie in, his own Hitchcock way. And I can go into like, his I guess Hitchcockian themes
Mm-hmm.
in regards to that. Like to point out a few uh there's a repulsion versus attraction. So there is kind of like he wants to be with her, but then he can't because there's like the whole thing with Rebecca stopping him from being in love with her because her like ghost shadow is in the way, right? And then there's
Right.
also a negative view on marriage, and that is very like predominant, I guess, because it didn't work out with Rebecca, clearly, and that led to it almost not letting it work out with his new bride. So,
Right. And yeah, and the the way that the movie kind of shifts, there was a point in the movie where I actually did think that there was going to be an actual Rebecca ghost as the movie kept going. I was wondering what, because I started to get the feeling that there was going to be some type of twist. And then when I started having that feeling, I was asking myself, well, what is this twist going to be? And I started thinking that, oh, maybe Rebecca's ghost is actually a thing. But I think the reason, and I want to talk about the end of the movie a little bit later, but one of the things that surprised me is when you get to like the first kind of big reveal of the movie, um, it came as a genuine surprise to me as somebody who a lot of times can guess what's going to happen in a movie. The when the twist comes and then keeps going, it comes out as a genuine surprise, and that's what made the movie more enjoyable as I was like entering into the second half, which is going to lead into why I didn't necessarily enjoy the second half of the remake when we talk about that later. But this particular movie, I will admit though, I did when I turned it on and saw it was like over 2 hours long. I did ask myself why. Why is this movie so long?
I actually didn't realize that it was that long until we watched it for the show, and I was like, "Oh, it's actually a pretty long movie."
Yes,
Um,
it's over 2 hours. It's like 2 hours and 10 minutes.
yeah, and
1940 black and white film.
yeah, and I can't decide if it really needed to be that long or not. I really can't because I just like it too much. And and I know Hitchcock is very precise. He like crafts everything. Sorry, so like he's just so particular. Like everything you see, everything that happens, he puts in there for a reason. Whether or not you
Right.
understand it, whether or not it has anything to do with the story, he put it there because he wanted it there. So I can't really think of anything to cut out of it. Um, but I mean, when it comes down to it, I love this movie so much because exactly what you said. I didn't see it coming. I didn't see the twist coming, and I think that's really incredible for a movie that was made
In the
60 years
40s.
ago. No, 80 years ago.
80 years ago
80
now.
years ago, and it surprised me when I watched it, and I'm guessing it surprised you. And that's like one of the things that I love about Hitchcock is that his movies still hold up. They
Yeah.
still surprise me, and like, I know I'd mentioned before, there are movies like Rear Window and Lady Vanishes that were copied. So when you watch it now, you wouldn't be surprised, but if you watch it then, I mean, it has to be original somewhere, and it was original with Hitchcock, and I think a lot of things were there. I know a lot of things were original with Hitchcock.
Yeah. And so like to your point of questioning whether or not you're not sure, you haven't come to a real conclusion of whether it needed to be this long or if it or not. I'm in the same boat because when I get to the end of the movie, when the movie is done and you're looking back at the experience you just had, there's a reason for the slow burn because it is very much a slow burn, but you understand why because he wants you to basically spend enough time to see these two interacting to like make it at least somewhat believable that they could be a couple. And this is actually one thing I think is stronger in the remake is that I buy their relationship more in the remake, as far as the time they spend together versus in this movie. By the time that De Winter asked her to marry him, it really feels like it came out of nowhere, and it kind of feels almost kind of like unnatural in a way. That I remember reacting in that way of that's odd, that doesn't feel right. um but that being said, for however rushed I felt that might have been, the fact of the matter remains that the rest of the first like hour or so of the movie is devoted towards building their relationship and her relationship with the people in the manor, as well as Mrs. Danvers, and also to kind of build up the image of who Rebecca was, because we need to build up this image of who she was because we're going to subvert that by the end of the movie. So it almost makes it so that when that reveal happens in this movie, I think the reason it feels so good is because of the amount of time we've spent up until that point to discover that what we believed is evidence to the contrary, actually.
Yeah, definitely. They spent a lot of time building up and and really fleshing out the character of Rebecca, even though we never see her, we never see a picture of her. We
Which I
only
love, by the way.
right. And somehow she has such a huge presence, which is like how do you do that, right? And that's also why I'm like, this is amazing that a person who is not in the movie is the name of the movie. Kind of like Keanu, right?
Yeah.
Except for even more so, because she actually plays a very big role in the movie, even though she's not in it.
Hmm.
Um, and yet she has a scene. Like she, we can talk about it like later in the reveal. I know you're gonna want to talk about that because it was really cool. But the other thing that I really felt strongly about at the beginning is the way that they built on the character of the new Mrs. De Winter, who, by the way, doesn't have a name.
No, she
Um,
doesn't. She just
exactly.
is called Mrs. De Winter.
Yeah. And talk about that because the whole point, I think, or like a really big thing that Hitchcock hit on is putting her in the shadow of Rebecca.
Yeah.
And I that was like one of my absolute favorite parts of the movie is just how much he did that, from like playing with the lighting where she like a lot of times had a shadow on her, like indoors there's a shadow on her, there's leaves on her and stuff like that, and then he puts her next to a fireplace that is bigger than her, and then he doesn't give her a name, and the name that she does have was someone else's name, Rebecca's name, so he's literally putting her in the shadow of Rebecca, and like that's just crazy.
Yeah.
It's
No, you're
cool.
right. All of these elements just kind of work towards the theme of what this movie is, and part of this character's journey, which is to kind of establish herself, to find out who she is, and to come into her own, to shed the shadow, and to be her own Mrs. De Winter. She struggles with that. And as far as her as a character goes, she has a very fun arc, even though I really was annoyed with her throughout the movie. And part of my annoyance, I was telling myself, is that maybe this is just because this is a movie in the 40s, so it's a different time period. Women had different roles in that time, but it was annoying me how weak she was, and how how much she just wanted to acquiesce to the whims of this dude who, in real essence, from when we're meeting him at the beginning, is kind of a jerk. He's kind of an asshole, and it's real. And so I was finding her pining after him to be very irritating at first, and then as the movie goes on, I was fine, and then she starts coming to her own. And by the end of the movie, I loved her. By the end of the movie, I was like, okay, you're great, but or you're better now because you're actually becoming someone different. And as part of that, she's leaving that old version of herself behind. In many ways, she's leaving that version of herself in the shadows when she comes into who she actually ends up being by the end of the movie.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that has a lot to do with the push and pull that Hitchcock likes to do between his characters. It's like super emphasized here, and I agree. It definitely builds up on her, the illusion versus reality thing for her, because once the illusion is gone and Maxim comes out with the truth, um, it kind of like everything kind of, because at the beginning it's kind of hazy, like we don't really know what's going on, and once we get to that first reveal, everything's lifted, and that's exactly when her character changes, is
Yep.
when the illusion is gone.
Yeah.
And yeah. And another thing he really likes to do is manipulation by the dead, and a big one that I know that he does it in Vertigo, but in Psycho, that's like probably the biggest one. Like that's on the news where like people are just manipulated by dead people. And that is a very big one in this movie, which, like, who thinks of that? Like, who likes doing that? It's so crazy. That's such a weird theme, but that is a Hitchcock thing to do.
It's a very cool idea as well. Like you said, the character of Rebecca manipulates everybody. She controls everybody, specifically Mrs. Danvers as well. So we want to talk about her real briefly. Is just that she was so creepy to me. The actress that they chose to play this woman was perfectly, whew, perfectly creepy. And that one scene where she's leaning over, basically just like it's at the party after the dress thing, after she sabotaged her with the dress, and they're in the room, and then Mrs. De Winter is crying, and Miss Danvers is just like, it'd be so easy, just lean out the window, just do it. And I was just like, what? She's encouraging her to kill herself. What? This woman is nuts.
How about the part where she's like, "Do you want to see her underwear?"
Right? I'm like,
this lady is off the rocker. Like,
yeah,
she is just bonkers, and in somehow a kind of subtle way, right? I like, and somehow it's like acceptable in the household, and you would think that she would get fired after doing all these things, which I was happy to see addressed in the other one. But
yeah,
we'll talk more about that later. But like, it's just like crazy how, like, if you think about the time when this was made, 1940, and how Hitchcock got away with a woman being obsessed with another woman
mm-hmm,
in a way where, like, they're even able to mention underwear and like touch the underwear and stuff like that. And
yeah. During this, like for this movie, right?
yeah, and like, just have it kind of be acceptable for same-sex attraction.
Yeah, because she was clearly like it was more than just a passing, like we're just friends. Like it was pretty clear that she loved, like was in love with that woman,
Yeah.
which drove her to be this way, and her saying like you will never be like her. You will never be like her. And so I really enjoyed the character of Miss Danvers. And also because there were times where she actually seemed reasonable. Like when Mrs. De Winter breaks the statue and Mrs. Danvers goes off on one of the other servants and then finds out that Mrs. De Winter was the one that breaks it, she very understandably says, "Hey, next time can you just tell me so I don't accuse someone of stealing?"
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, that's reasonable. Like, there's a lot of points in that movie where like these people feel like people, and
Yeah.
that's one other thing that's really strong about the film.
It's illusion versus reality. It makes you question people's characters. It makes you question, like, who they really are. And then, it's kind of like, it makes the whole thing more of a mystery, because you're like, is Miss Danvers a bad guy? Is she gonna be the villain, or is Rebecca a ghost and that's gonna be a villain? You just don't know. There's just so many questions, and then when you get to the reveal, let's talk about the reveal. Let's talk about the cabin, and that beautiful, beautiful shot of nothing. Literally nothing. So it's basically Mr. De Winter, or Maxim, explaining his final conversation with Rebecca in that boathouse, I guess.
Yeah.
And so as he is voicing the conversation, he's doing the dialogue for her, and the camera is like literally pointing at an empty couch. And then he talks about like how, she like gets up and walks across the room, and the camera pans, and that's just like, there's nobody in the shot, but because he's doing such a good job voicing Rebecca and describing it, it feels like you can actually imagine her in the shot, even though there's nobody in it.
You know what's so funny? This is so weird. You're right that there's no one in the shot, but my brain swears that I've seen her fall over and hit her head, and smile as she dies. Um, like I swear I've seen it, even though I know that I haven't. So that's it's a testament to what you're saying. And in one way, you could be like, well, this is like one giant information dump, which is true. But the way that it's carried out, it really works because for me, and this is one thing I liked about this movie more so than the remake, is that up until the moment he says the words, I hated her, I am still thinking the same as Mrs. De Winter. I have not started to think differently. And that's something that's different with the remake that we'll talk about. But with this movie, it really holds its cards close to the chest until that moment. And then when he says, I hated her, all of the movie gets recontextualized all of a sudden. Everything like brings on like new meaning and a new way of kind of like seeing these things. And then when you hear how she was an awful human, and then even how she wanted him to kill her. Another thing that's great about this movie that I like more than the remake is the fact that he actually doesn't do anything. So he's legitimately innocent. He's only guilty of basically trying to hide her body. But the fact is, it looks like he did something. And he understands that and he sees that smile. So he then does this thing to make it look like she died at sea, which then can become a new vision of she committed suicide. And based off of what they've seen, that's still a viable reason for why she would have died. So it's just from that point on, like the movie is it's crazy, but it works, and that's like one of the reasons I'm like so excited about it.
Mm-hmm. In 1940.
Yeah,
Right? It's a black and white film, but it's like it's still like you're on the edge of your seat. I love that.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then even with the whole explanation that they have of his like when he talks about when Mrs. De Winter talks about how his grief could have made him identify the wrong woman or misidentify her. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That's the perfect strategy. And then she's basically coaching him. So it's cool because of two things, right? One, he didn't do anything wrong, but he looks like he did. He still did hide a body. But two, she stands by him. So that's the other part of the movie that you're talking about where it's kind of anti-marriage, but at the same time there's a part of it that almost kind of like supports the relationship because their relationship almost doesn't work. But the moment that it's actually Rebecca's death that brings them together and makes them even closer. And it also Rebecca, I guess, because Rebecca's been dead the entire movie, but the realization that he did not love her is the motivation or the push that Mrs. Winter needs to basically step up. And now all of a sudden, she has more of a voice. She can actually influence some of these more of these conversations or more of these situations more so than she could in the past. And that's one thing that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I think after that, it's about there's like 25 minutes left in the movie after that reveal, and then I'm like, wait, what's gonna happen now? I thought this is like gonna be the end of the movie, right? But then they have like all this other court case, and this part is like it still makes sense to me to have it in the movie, but it did kind of like the movie just kind of went like this for me, and then it kind of went like, oh, we're going back down to a slow pace again. But it's still interesting. I think it still like pretty much held my attention because then it's like, well, what are we gonna do now? So we're actually in a mess now. Well, what are we gonna do now? And it was a little weird, and I guess like it has to do maybe a little bit with the times because it was 80 years ago. That the cop, the accuser, the suspect, and the suspect's best friend went to go together to investigate the doctor.
Yeah, they all left together.
Which is weird, but like if you think about it, does it really matter? Because this is how we're getting the reveal.
Right. Because there's one more reveal left to have because the movie plays with our expectations to make us think that she might have been pregnant. And so it makes it now look if she was murdered, he killed a pregnant woman and she has all the symptoms of being pregnant, but there's one more twist left for the movie to dish out. And it's the reveal that, well, it comes in really two really cool ways. One, it's like the doctor doesn't have anyone named Mrs. De Winters in his files. And then they come across the name Danvers, and she used a different name, and then you come to find out that she had cancer. And the reason I like it, how it's handled in the first movie or in the original, is because after the reveal that she has cancer, everybody, including the accuser, believes that she committed suicide, including Mrs. Danvers. So they all are kind of wrong, and the mystery hasn't really been like revealed to them, and there's no kind of even hint that they might suspect what the truth is. They believe a lie, and I kind of like the fact that they believe a lie to be true, and they don't actually ever get the true answer of what happened to her.
Mm-hmm. And then you get this whole feeling like, whoa, did a dead person really just play one on all these people in the movie?
Yeah.
So someone that's not in the movie just like fooled everyone. It's just crazy how like I guess in a way she's kind of like a MacGuffin, right? But
Yeah.
but a little bit more than that, because she's not really in the movie, and like everyone talks about her, and she is like the center of the movie. But she really does have like, it's like she did everything before the movie started and planted all these seeds to have like all these things take effect. But I guess you could say she is kind of like a MacGuffin, but it's just crazy. It's crazy to me, like even now, like talking about it, thinking about it, how someone who's not in the movie has such a big part in the movie.
No, I 100% agree. I guess my last question for you would be, do you think that her plan was to basically frame Maxim for her murder? And if that was her plan, then that technically means she almost was successful, but she failed.
Yeah, no, I 100% think that she was trying to screw over Maxim because they didn't like each other. She was
Right.
having an affair, and I think that she was like,
And she
well,
was on an affair with her cousin, right? Just to be
I
clear?
I'm not sure if he's her real cousin,
Or is that a lie?
or
Okay.
if it's a lie, like to keep things like, you know, like secret, so they could have a secret affair. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, I 100% think that she, in her mind, she was probably like, well, if I'm gonna go down, I'm taking everyone down with me.
Yep. And in that way, wow, that's interesting because in that way, she might not have taken him down by making him out to be a murderer, but she still has a sort of victory in the fact that Mrs. Danvers' love for her causes Mrs. Danvers to burn down the mansion,
Mm-hmm.
burns down everything that he has. And while and I thought they were going to kill Mrs. De Winters at that point, but the fact that he and Mrs. De Winters are still alive is, I guess, a plus. But the fact of the matter remains that Rebecca was able to have such an effect on Mrs. Danvers that even though Rebecca's plan to frame him failed, her love with her Mrs. Danvers' love for her resulted in Mrs. Danvers carrying out an alternative, um, I guess, way of type of plan where she was able to just still take something from him.
Yeah. And even through all that, with the house burning down and everything, we still have a happy ending.
Yeah.
How cool is that? So that's why I say it's a romance movie.
I think I'd be inclined to agree with you. But we're coming up on time here. Is there anything else that you wanted to quickly get off your chest that you wanted to talk about for this movie?
um, I did want to say, did this movie remind you of other movies that you've seen that came after it? Say, like, I don't know, Beauty and the Beast, Gone with the Wind, maybe a little bit.
You know, it's funny, yeah, but I didn't put a time on it. I never remember when these Disney movies come out because there's always these Disney movies where I swear came out when I was a kid, but they were from like the 40s. Like I swear Cinderella is like from the 20s or something. I
It's
don't
from the
know.
50s.
It's from okay, yeah. So I never know when these movies come out. So I didn't actually know when Beauty and the Beast came out. Um, but yes, you're 100% right.
Pretty sure Beauty and the Beast is like the 80s, 90s.
I'm pretty sure it's the 90s because they use CG. Now that I'm thinking about it,
Yeah.
but There's normally I don't ever really think about. I always get confused because I saw these Disney movies as a kid, and I at the time as a kid I thought that they were new, and then I when I grew up I realized that they came at varying times in history before I was ever born. Um, but yeah, you're right. This movie is definitely an inspiration for movies like that. And even like the music goes from kind of the whimsical music that you normally hear in movies like that, and then it has kind of like the darker moments in the movie with the heavy dong dong or whatever like they how they do. So it's a pretty interesting balance between the suspense and the romance.
Yeah, it's definitely old timey, but I feel like this story still really holds up.
Yeah, agreed. And I was worried when I first started watching the movie because I was thinking it was not going to be my cup of tea, especially because I felt like it was moving pretty slowly.
Yeah.
So when I got to like when I kept going, and then finally when we get to the end and everything, I realized that when looking back that I really enjoyed my experience, and I literally said when I turned off the movie, okay, this is a good movie. I see it. I see why.
Yay!
So I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Glad you liked it.
Yeah. So, but have you guys seen Rebecca? Have you checked it out? We're talking about the 1940s version. We're going to be talking about the 2020 version here in a moment. Um, but did you guys like it? Is it something that you've expected when you saw the movie for the first time, or did it catch you off guard like it caught me? Are you a Hitchcock fan like Cheryl, and you just know everything Hitchcock and you can just pull it out? Whatever you thought about it, comment below. Let us know. And while you're down there, if you give us a like, share, and subscribe. Even if you don't, though, I have been Chris, and this has been
Cheryl, and we will see you all next time.